Hello again, YouTube. I ran across a video series by Ravi Zacharias International Ministries entitled, Does God Exist? It's an older series from 2014. They're all about 3 to 6 minute videos, but they're supposed to provide good arguments for God's existence. Surprise, surprise, the proofs really aren't that strong. But the videos themselves have decent production quality and do a good job of sounding complete on the surface while glossing over some pretty big holes. So I decided to respond to a few of them. I'm probably honestly too lazy to do the whole series, but I'm going to pick and choose a few. And I thought I'd start with their moral argument for God. So like I said, you can see in the opening, they got some pretty decent production quality. Someone put time and effort into putting these videos together. But the actual apologetics, well, we'll see.
The moral argument is one of the most fascinating argument, and for me, I think is the most compelling, because we exist in a universe that has do's and don'ts. It has rules of behavior. There are things we are supposed to do and things that we are not supposed to do.
Wait a second. Are you sure about that? That there are things we are and aren't supposed to do? And that all of these things are universal? We definitely as societies and individuals have created limits. But you're saying that they're universally dictated. So hopefully you're going to provide some demonstrable evidence for those do's and don'ts? And how you know they're universal?
Every human being has this sense that we are truly and really, in reality, obligated to avoid evil and to do good. Everybody has that sense of conscience. There's this real sense within every human being that there is an ought, there is a moral imperative that comes from somewhere. And it is universal, and so if it's universal, it's not just culturally shaped, even though some morality, certainly we would acknowledge, has some cultural factors in it. But this universal ought, this universal imperative, has to point to something bigger than humanity.
Okay, quite a few problems with this section. First, no, we don't all have this internal moral guide. And I'm not just talking about your greedy landlord or the jerk who broke your taillight. I'm talking about people who actually lack empathy. According to the DMS-4, approximately 3% of adult males and 1% of adult females have antisocial personality disorder, the technical name for what people commonly refer to as psycho and sociopaths. People with antisocial personality disorder do not have your sense of conscience, that ought you refer to. That means in just the United States, about 7.6 million people are missing your so-called sense of ought. It's a pretty big explanation needed if everybody's supposed to have this. And that's not to say everyone with antisocial personality disorder is behaving as a monster and should be locked away to protect society. Many of them successfully function and navigate and succeed in life. But that's not because they have empathy or follow standard moral axioms. It's because they've learned that behaving in certain ways allows them to reach their goals. It's more a matter of enlightened self-interest, or in even some cases greed. Second, as you admit, morals vary from culture to culture. It isn't universal at all. Morals vary over time and over different societies. So if the oughts are universal, why don't all cultures at all times adhere to them? You don't even offer a single example of one moral ought that all cultures follow. Is that because there isn't one? Third, even if our species had some sort of universal moral imperative, why would it have to come from outside us? Why couldn't it just be a natural outgrowth of a social species? Where's any evidence that these moral oughts you say exist come from outside ourselves or our society?
Morality or moral properties have a very interesting feature, and this is they are normative. They tell us how we are supposed to behave, what we're supposed to do, and what we're not supposed to do. And if that is the case, if they are normative, if we have moral duties, not just moral values, things that we have to do, it really does cry out, in my view, for a moral lawgiver if we do have moral duties.
Let's just say that moral values do provide moral duties, that they are normative. How do you get from that to a lawgiver? It's not instantly obvious, but is a pretty big jump to assume that moral duties require a moral lawgiver. You haven't even yet proven that morals are universal or that they come from someplace other than our everyday society. And yet you're adding in this assumption that moral duties require a moral lawgiver? Any evidence you can provide for this point?
I can go back to my days before I was a Christian and I lived a fairly wild life. Now, the idea that I didn't want God to exist was a very key issue in my life because I didn't want something to impose upon me. But there was a sense at one level that laws as such were just the imposition of society. They were the imposition of parents or schools or authorities of the police. And only suckers believed that. And yet, when someone did something wrong to me, I was betrayed in a relationship very badly. And I was deeply angry. In fact, I wanted to go and beat the people up that were involved in this because I wanted justice for the wrong that was done to me. So even in my non-believing state, that there was no God, there was no morality, there was a moral conscience badly orientated that I was following in some sense.
Okay, so you were personally a jerk and didn't really give a shit about harming anyone else until someone injured you. And that's proof of universal morality? Because it kind of suggests the opposite. It suggests that you didn't have the same moral code as everyone around you. It suggests you had to learn by experience that breaking moral codes have costs to you as well as society. And it took you being damaged to teach you this. So that suggests not so much universal. Also, I really like the subtle dropping in of Christianity in your reference here. It sort of implies that your particular religion has a stronger moral foundation than other religions, but without providing any evidence for that. And the whole wording of your anecdotal story implies that people without religion are somehow less moral and actually anti-authoritarian versus just unbelieving in your God. Side note, you again forgot to provide evidence of that point, and by implication, if there was a universal moral system, whether people believed in your God or not, they should follow the same morals. But as you showed, you weren't following those same morals. And as we already discussed, morality isn't universal.
Another society may disagree with those very laws. What we say goes for our society might not go for other societies, and a much more recent contemporary example is, of course, what we saw in the Holocaust. We saw the most educated nation at its time come to a point where it was systematically exterminating those who they thought were weak. Now, why? We have to ask the question why. If we jump straight to the idea that they were depraved monsters, we're missing out on key information here. The conclusion here was that if we are just meant to survive, if that's our whole purpose, then we ought to make ourselves as strong as a society as possible. So we're going to weed out the weak. It's our moral imperative to weed out the weak. There is no way we can conclude the Holocaust was wrong if we are cultural relativists, if we believe morals come from our own culture or society. But we know, as we showed in the Nuremberg trials, we know what they did was wrong, and we're willing to say that.
And of course, we end with the Nazis. But of course we must in a moral argument. Guess what? I'm not even going to argue with you about cultural relativism. I'm not going to argue with you about if the Nazis in Germany were Christian or atheist or something else entirely. Because you have hung your entire moral argument on the initial fact that everyone has this conscience telling them what they ought to do and ought not to do. If that was so, and these morals included the fact that murdering people of different religions and the weak and disabled was wrong, then Nazi Germany's Holocaust should have played out very differently. The everyday people should have fought back to stop it. The doctors, the soldiers, the lawyers, the judges, the railroadmen, the everyday members of society who were caught up in this nightmare, who went along with this, who willingly agreed to do this to others, should have been fighting back harder to protect the weak, the disabled, the Jews. They should have fought back. They should have hidden more people. They should have done many, many things. But they didn't. They went along with it, mostly with little compunction, allowing themselves to overcome any moral qualms and keep going. And we know this from their own words after the war, in thousands and thousands of hours of interviews, in letters, in journals, in diaries written during the war. We can look at their own words, their own train of thought. They justified and normalized what was going on and supported it. They were able to see the people that died as less than them, as less important. And if there was a universal moral conscience, where is your evidence of it in their society? The fact that the Holocaust happens and genocides like Rwanda exist and continue to happen is direct evidence there isn't a universal out. That morality can and is dramatically and radically affected by the society you live in. All right, so that wasn't much of an argument for God. Not only did they fail to provide any evidence for their assertions of a universal morality, every point they tried to make in support of it had some pretty big holes. But if you weren't thinking about it, this would have felt to you like a pretty strong case because of the good quality, because of the personal testimony, and yes, even because of the Nazis. But again, it's all show, no substance. I'm actually more than a little annoyed that they put so much production effort, but offered such poor apologetics. All right, well, on to the fun part. A shout out to the new Godless Ozzie. I recommend going and checking out his channel. And then a shout out to two of my fabulous friends, the Lavendar Lady and NotJah Witness. If you are not following either of those people, go do so right now, right now. They're both amazing members of our community and deserve all the subs and follows they can get. If you aren't following them and you're following me, you're nuts. Now, everybody remember, sing and dance every chance you can get.